Welcome back, children. Now in video 7 of the same chapter, human reproduction, I am going to deal with the topic hormonal control on the male and female reproductive system. So a quick recap of what we had learnt in 11th standard. We know that in the brain, the lower part, the floor of the brain is the hypothalamus. This hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland, which is called the master gland, by a stalk. See, by a stalk. I am highlighting the stalk. By a stalk called infundibulum. And this pituitary gland is broadly divided into two lobes, anterior lobe and posterior lobe. So this is the anterior lobe, and this is the posterior lobe. And we have learnt in 11th standard the hormones produced by the anterior lobe and the hormones produced by the posterior lobe. In the last class we learnt about the hormones produced by the posterior lobe, which is very important for parturition, that is oxytocin. Helps in parturition. Then there is another hormone which is controlling the water absorption, reabsorption in the kidney, that is the antidiuretic hormone, ADH. So two hormones from the posterior pituitary, and from the anterior pituitary there are 6 hormones. And today we are going to learn the influence of the hormones of the anterior pituitary. The hormones are FSH, follicle stimulating hormones, luteinizing hormones, ACTH, melanocyte stimulating hormones, thyroid stimulating hormones, and prolactin. And also this very important hormone called the growth hormone. So there are actually 6 hormones produced by the anterior pituitary, namely the growth hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormones, adrenocorticotropic hormones, thyroid stimulating hormones, and prolactin. Now I have strike MSH, that is melanocyte stimulating hormone, is produced by an intermediate lobe. We have learnt in 11th standard in mammals there is an intermediate lobe here, very rudimentary structure. This middle lobe, intermediate lobe, which produces the melanocyte stimulating hormones. Okay, but now what hold relevance here is the 6 hormones produced by the anterior pituitary. Now of these 6 hormones produced by the anterior pituitary, the hormones that control the male and female reproductive system are FSH and LH. FSH and LH. Okay, so this is a quick recap of your 11 to get into the topic hormonal control on the male and female reproductive system. So once again a brief view on the 11th standard. The hypothalamus, which is the floor of the brain, is connected to the pituitary gland by a stalk called infundibulum. The pituitary gland in mammals are divided into mainly 2 parts, anterior lobe and posterior lobe. The anterior lobe produces these hormones, growth hormone, FSH, LH, ACTH, TSH and prolactin. The posterior pituitary gland produces the 2 hormones, oxytocin and ADH. See, this is a male reproductive system. We will start with the hypothalamus. And also you should remember the hypothalamus produces 2 types of hormones, releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. So we are starting off with the hypothalamus, and remember the colors I have used. For hormones I have used the magenta color. And for the target organs or target glands I have highlighted in a box. Okay, so now we will start off. The hypothalamus produces the gonadotropin releasing hormones, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete 2 hormones, which are the FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Now the follicle stimulating hormones stimulates the Sertoli cells. We have learned the cross section of the testis, and we know the location of the Sertoli cells. It is within the seminiferous tubule, and the function is pyramid shape, and the function is nourishment of the sperms. So This FSH stimulates the Sertoli cells to release certain factors, and these factors are responsible for the process called spermiogenesis. We know what is spermiogenesis. It is the transformation of spermatids into sperms. We know how is the transformation. The spermatids are circular. Then what happened to the spherical structures? It gets modified into or transformed into head, middle piece and tail. So this transformation is known as spermiogenesis. Now on the other hand, the LH stimulates or triggers the Leydig cells. Do you all know the location of the Leydig cells? Last class I taught you in the testis. Outside the seminiferous tubules, in the gaps called the interstitial space, there are the cluster of cells called Leydig cells. The function of the Leydig cells is to produce the hormone testosterone. Okay, so it is the LH that is stimulating the Leydig cells to secrete testosterone, and the testosterone is responsible for the process called spermatogenesis. We know what is spermatogenesis, the entire process of sperm formation, right from spermatogonia till sperms, that is from spermatogonia to primary spermatocyte to secondary spermatocyte to the formation of spermatid and finally sperm. So this entire process is under the control of testosterone. So did you notice that the pituitary gland is indirectly influencing the testis? That's why we have learned in lower classes that pituitary gland is known as the master gland, because it is involved in controlling the functioning of other glands. Here, which is the gland it is controlling? It is controlling the testis, the gonads. Okay, so that is the male reproductive system where the hormones are controlling. So once again, a brief recap. Hypothalamus in males produces the hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormones, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to release two types of hormones, FSH and LH. Now how the FSH acts? The FSH triggers the Sertoli cells, and the Sertoli cells as a result produces factors which brings about spermiogenesis. On the other hand, the LH, which is produced by the anterior pituitary, stimulates the Leydig cells to produce testosterone, and the testosterone is responsible for the process of spermatogenesis. Next, we are going to see the female reproductive system. The first part is the same. See, the hypothalamus produces the gonadotropin releasing hormones, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to release two types of hormones, FSH and LH. The FSH, where it acts on? FSH, follicle stimulating hormones. So it's very easy for you to remember. It stimulates the follicle cells. We know where are the follicle cells. Follicle cells surrounds the oocyte. I have drawn an oocyte. This definitely represents a primary oocyte. Okay. Now you can see these are the follicle cells, and this is the oocyte. And we know the oocyte, we have to specify whether it's primary or secondary depending on which ovarian follicle it depends. It is in. This which is ovarian, this is the which ovarian follicle is? This is the primary ovarian follicle. So which is the oocyte here? Primary oocyte. Anyway, here the follicle cells are stimulated by FSH. So this FSH stimulates the follicle cells, and the follicle cells surrounds the oocyte, and as a result this produces the hormone estrogen. So the source of estrogen is the follicle cells which surrounds the ovarian follicle or the oocyte. Now on the other hand, the LH, we know the ovarian follicle, you have to recollect the processes of the stages of the ovarian follicle. From primary ovarian follicle becomes secondary ovarian follicle, secondary to tertiary ovarian follicle, from tertiary ovarian follicle becomes a Graafian follicle. Okay, so I have represented a Graafian follicle. This represents a Graafian follicle. Okay, and a brief outline of the Graafian follicle. This is the secondary oocyte. Then it is surrounded by zona pellucida. Then we have the antrum. and the follicular cells are arranged in two layers, outer theca and inner theca, or theca interna and theca externa. So this is the representation of a Graafian follicle. Now here what happens is, this LH, the luteinizing hormones, stimulates the Graafian follicle to rupture. Now this will rupture. So the follicular cells rupture and it will result in the release. See, it will result in the release of the oocyte or release of the egg. This process is called ovulation. So what's the role of the luteinizing hormones? It stimulates the Graafian follicles to rupture. I ruptured it, and what happens? The egg is released. What is this process called? This process is called ovulation. Okay, now this empty Graafian follicle. Now we have the empty Graafian follicle. This empty Graafian follicle, after the release of the egg, what is it called now? Corpus luteum. Again the LH stimulates the empty Graafian follicle. The empty Graafian follicle is also called corpus luteum, to secrete the hormones progesterone. So there is a twofold effect of the LH. One, in the Graafian follicle, it promotes the rupture of the Graafian follicle to release the egg. Now the remnants of the Graafian follicles is called the corpus luteum. Again this progesterone acts on the corpus luteum to release the hormone progesterone, and progesterone is very important for maintenance of pregnancy because it maintains the endometrial lining of the uterus. When I deal with menstrual cycle, you will understand the importance of progesterone. It is therefore nicknamed as the pregnancy hormone. So once again, a quick recap of the hormonal control on females. So focus on the flow chart. Okay, the hypothalamus produces the gonadotropin releasing hormones, which stimulates the anterior pituitary, and the anterior pituitary releases two hormones, FSH and LH. How the FSH acts? The FSH acts on the follicle cells. Where are the follicle cells located? It's surrounding the oocyte to release the hormone estrogen. Whereas the LH acts on the Graafian follicle, the last stage of the ovarian follicle, primary, secondary, tertiary, and the Graafian follicle is ready to release the egg, but only when the LH is released, it ruptures. Very important, the LH should be released, then it ruptures and releases the egg. That process called ovulation. Now the remaining Graafian follicle is called the corpus luteum. This LH acts on the corpus luteum to produce the hormone progesterone. And we know in lower classes we have learned the female hormone estrogen is responsible for bringing about all the characters in female, the secondary sexual characters in females. And progesterone here is responsible, as I told you, for maintaining the endometrial lining for pregnancy. Similarly, this side, the testosterone is responsible for masculine characteristics in males, secondary sexual characters in males. So I hope you have understood today's slot. It's very important. This time also for the boards, this particular question was asked. Thank you.